And I think at this point, it's important to just also talk about this idea of activation, because sometimes I talk to people and they're like, I'm not that stressed. But when you break down like what's happening for 95% of people in a day, there are high levels of activation. So as an example, you may not find, your kids saying like, I need this, I need this, I need this, getting out the door on time, getting to work. Okay, you love your job, but it's busy, but you love it and there's lots going on. And then you're hanging out with friends and you like that. And all the while you've received 267 emails across the day, and your WhatsApp and your Instagram and your text messages are all dinging off the hook. You may not put a label on that is stressful, because stress we often associate with like mental emotional overwhelm.
Right.
But your system, your sympathetic nervous system, is activated.
Hello and welcome to Parenting for Thought. If you've heard any of my previous episodes, you know that this is the podcast where we talk about things that parents want to know, and even if not, we're here anyways. So I have Rachel Mark joining me today, and I'm pretty sure that we met through the magic of Instagram, where I came across your profile and was just real excited. And did I comment on one of your videos or something? Or did I just DM you?
Yeah, I think we were just messaging. We met through social media and just started chatting and thought this would be a great collaboration and opportunity to connect.
Yes. And please, you'll put it into so much better words than I can, Rachel. Can you tell the audience who you are, what you do, and then they'll understand immediately why I got so excited about you?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to chat with you. And my name's Rachel. I'm an acupuncturist and an integrative health coach. I'm based in Victoria, British Columbia, which is on the west coast. We're on a little island on the west coast of Canada. And my clinical area of passion is really around supporting people to understand and work with their nervous system. So we'll talk a lot more about nervous system health, what that even is. But ultimately, what I see so much in practice is people who are stressed, overwhelmed, anxious. They've got a lot going on. A lot of the people I work with are in that sort of like 30 to 50-year-old range. And that's a busy place to be. So a lot of people have a lot going on, and we see sort of this trickle effect of different symptoms that can come up. And so my passion is really about taking an integrative approach to health. I have a background in acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine, but also in exercise science, integrative and functional medicine for women, and health behavior change. So kind of bringing all the pieces together to best support people in living their best lives.
Rachel, gosh, so interesting. You're talking about people who are 30 to 50 years old with so much going on. Gee, I wonder if you see a lot of parents in your practice.
I sure do. I see a lot of parents. I see a lot of working a lot in women's health. I work with a lot of people in terms of fertility through pregnancy, and then people sort of disappear for a while when they've got wee little baby ones at home, and then come back, sort of in that like end of the first year, and, young kids, teenagers, the whole shebang, all ages.
The high stress points, perhaps.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, there's a lot going on for people in that age range. Parents, absolutely. And it's like parents with young kids, with jobs, with usually at that age, we're getting to the point where we might have aging parents ourselves who we're supporting, other family members. We're busy. There's just a lot going on.
Yeah. relationship changes. If you've been married by that point for 7 to 10 years, you might see that that relationship is changing. Maybe you don't know if you're staying in it or not anymore. You might be divorced and looking for new love. Your friendships are coming and going. There's all sorts of things. And
Yeah.
job pressure on its own is enough. And let's not discount that we've all just collectively been through a global pandemic. That was a collective global trauma. And it's these
Mhm.
layers, right? So yeah, the nervous system. This is some of my bread and butter, but this is not the thing that I am an expert on, right? Like it's a thing that I have functional knowledge on, and it's something that I am aware of in my own self daily as a person who has panic attacks. So, I've got a decent understanding of my parasympathetic nervous system, which already is like, what is that? So, can you get us all on the same page about what is the nervous system beyond just it's the actual nerves in our body, and what is its role, and what is then the parasympathetic nervous system and its role?
Mhm. Yeah, great question. Yeah, I love this idea of like zooming out a little bit and just getting that like working knowledge of what is the nervous system. Because as we were saying before, the nervous system as like a term has become really hot. We see it all over Instagram of like, do your nervous system reset and do this to help your nervous system. But like, if we
It
don't actually
sounds
know,
so cheese. It sounds like detox. And it's like if you
yeah,
have kidneys and a liver, you're detoxing all the time, 24/7. You don't need a special earth mud thing. Like it just feels really predatory when people are saying, do your nervous system detox or your nervous system reset. Like, is that as pseudosciency as it sounds?
yeah, it's marketing. It's marketing. And I hope that there is some good wisdom in those programs. You never know. I myself, and I'll speak to it later, maybe have a 10-day reset that I call it, but it's very different than what we would see a lot of other programs being. So we'll talk about that later. But let's talk about, yeah, what is the nervous system? So I always think of our nervous system as the communication pathway within our body. And if you think about, let's say, you're driving your car and you're driving into a big city, you start out on the highway, right? And there's like multi lanes and you're going fast. And then as you get to the area where you're trying to go, you're going to exit the highway and you go onto a smaller highway. And then you're going to exit that and you're going to go onto a main road in a city. And then, down into like the smaller streets and cul-de-sacs eventually. And you can think of your nervous system like a transport network within your body. So that same sort of image that you get from driving into a big city, you can think of that in your body. So that main highway being your spinal cord, and then sort of the various um, nerves that are coming off and going out to the periphery being those like smaller branching roads getting to where you want to go. And the whole
Great
purpose,
visual. That's such
yeah,
a great visual. I love that.
yeah, I love it too, and I don't actually know like where I came up with that, and if I took it from someone, I give whoever's out there credit. I just like
It
thought
just
of it
seems
that way. Yeah,
it just seems so obvious once you said it like that.
yeah,
Like I've
yeah,
never considered it as that, but as soon as you were saying it, I'm going, well, yeah. And like the car is the piece of information that's being transported, right?
totally, totally, and it can
Yeah.
go in different directions, right? So we have information that's basically coming from our brain to our spinal cord and out. So that might be more of what we would call like our motor system. So right now, I'm thinking I'm thirsty. And there's a message that goes from my brain down to my arm to reach out and grab my water bottle to take a sip. And the muscles in my arm contract to bring this up to my face, right? So that's that way. And then the other direction is all the information from our environment. And that can be stuff like touching a hot stove and a reflex that pulls away. But it can also be those sensations that we get, like you're in an uncomfortable situation and you start to feel like the hairs on the back of your neck perk up, or you get goosebumps, right? That's information from your environment being transported through your nervous system for processing. So that's like
Wow.
the big image of it.
Mm-hmm.
When we start to think about our nervous system from a like nervous system control perspective, the things that like we have more control over, funny enough, we're actually zooming in, and this is what's all over the internet around like nervous system detox, etc. We're zooming in on our autonomic nervous system. And that's one division of our nervous system. And our autonomic nervous system, it's called that because the autonomic nervous system, just like it sounds, auto, it's the automatic things.
Mm-hmm.
So these are things like your heart beating, your breath rate, where blood is going in your body at what point. So it's not always like equally distributed, right? If you're exercising, let's say you're out for a brisk walk or a run, there's going to be more blood flow in your legs, and there's going to be less in like your intestines for digestion, right? Your body's very smart that way.
Right.
It's your pupils dilating, which is about taking in information. It's about your senses turning on. And so this is really what it comes down to, is really about our survival response. And ultimately, that is our stress response. So within the autonomic nervous system, there's what you described, the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is what is known as sometimes our fight or flight system. Other responses in that don't always make the quick, catchy name are freeze and fawn, right? So fight, flight, freeze, fawn.
I just have to say, I'm so thrilled that they've added freeze and fawn, because these are things that people have been experiencing but had no name for. And I mean, even me, who's been very aware of my panic attacks and my trauma responses, I have in my past fawned several times for survival, but I had no name for it, and I wasn't sure why I was doing what I was doing. And then in reflection, I felt so terrible, and I'm going, why didn't I see that for what it was? Why didn't I behave differently? Why didn't I cut it off at the source? And why did I let that person? No. That was survival, and I was fawning, and I was doing my absolute best at that time. It's so much more empowering to have that name for it, to have that label, to understand that that's a natural response and not a failure, not a personal failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you can think of this like in the wild, right? So something that we'll talk about in a minute maybe is like how stress has changed over time, because we have that sympathetic system, and then we have our parasympathetic system, which is like our rest, digest, relax system. And so the reason that we get that term fight or flight, freeze and fawn, is because if you think about animals in the wild, they're much better at this than we are. But animals in the wild, and they come across a predator, right? So, and we could think about this, humans thousands of years ago, what our significant stressors were wild animals. It's always the example of like the bear, the lion, the tiger. And so you come across that threat, and what do? You have a few options, right? And we see this you can use the animals in the wild as an example. They might fight. So they might like gear up, they make themselves big and puffy, and they're like, I'm going to fight you. They might flee. So they run like heck to get out of there. They might freeze and play dead, right?
Awesome.
Or like hide. right? It's a good survival response. Or they may fawn. And fawn is that example of like, you're trying to smooth things like, hey, we can be friends here. It's okay. Right. And these can
Look,
all
if
happen.
anybody who knows about dog behavior, dogs, it's called appeasement in dogs. It's the same thing, and they'll do a lip lick, or they'll duck their heads down, or they'll even roll over a little bit and show. I'm just want to play, or I'm chill, I'm cool. We don't need to
Mhm.
fight. It's all good.
Yeah. Yeah. And so great. I love that you brought up dogs because this is what we see. Like dogs are, the animals that we're probably the most familiar with in modern day. But if you
Mine
watch
is
the,
laying somewhere nearby sleeping
yeah,
while I'm recording. Oh, there he is. He's on my spot on the bed.
yeah, exactly. That's what they do. They're so great. I have
Yes.
a little puppy too, and they're so great. But they really are these examples of what it actually is to have health in your nervous system. Because if you watch a dog or you watch a wild animal, there's studies on this. There's the famous one with the gazelles, and basically they've had this big altercation, and then what do they do once they recognize that things are safe? Or what does a dog do after they have had a big play with another dog, or they, got really excited about something, or you told them, don't do that? They get up and they shake, right? They shake it
Yeah,
off.
they do a stress shake.
Yeah, they do a shake. And we see that with animals in the wild. We see that with our dogs all the time. And so, what that's actually doing is that is like clearing, resetting the nervous system. It's their way of saying, okay, that stress response, that's done. And now we're moving on.
So that's a natural reset. That's a kind of reset that we are capable of doing.
Yeah. And don't for the most
Okay.
part. Yeah.
Huh. How
Yeah.
interesting.
So when you think about as human beings, and we come across stressors all the time. And the stressors that we come across are very different than how our nervous system was wired thousands of years ago, because our nervous
Mhm.
systems were wired and they really haven't changed. They were wired for those big, intense stressors, like you're walking and there's a lion there.
Mhm.
And then the lion goes and it's okay. And it's okay for a while. So it's like intense and back to neutral, intense and back to neutral. But for us nowadays, the majority of us, we're not getting back to neutral. So when we think about the differences between stressors of thousands of years ago when our nervous systems were wired, it was really for these intense periods of stress
Right.
followed by returning back to neutral, right? And that's
Right.
what our dogs are really great at doing is they have these moments of stress or activation, and then they shake it off and they return back to neutral. So it's
Real quick, I just want to say, for the folks listening or watching, what you missed is that all of this just happened in real time, which will have been edited out. And that's that while Rachel was talking just a bit ago, our doorbell rang, and immediately my dog had a high stress response. He started barking. He went straight to the door to look to see what's going on. What intruder dare enter his kingdom? And as soon as he came back in after everything was done, he did a little shake off, and now he's already laying back down, having a lovely time. So we had Archie gave us the perfect example.
yes, Archie. Yes. I love
Yeah,
that. It's so good. Like that's what's so great about this
exactly what we're
stuff,
talking
right?
about.
Yeah, and that's what's
Yeah,
so great about talking about the nervous system and starting to get a better understanding of it is because this is, I mean, it's in all of us. We all have a nervous
right.
system, but we see this. There's such a beautiful examples all the time of when it works and also when it doesn't. Um, right? So because our nervous systems are wired for these intense periods of stress, but then we're supposed to return back to neutral and then have this time in the parasympathetic system, that rest, relaxation, sleep,
Mhm.
healing, digestion place.
Yeah.
Um, that's what our bodies want to do. But what happens is if we look at our modern day life, most people aren't having these intense periods followed by returning back to neutral. And I think at
Right.
this point, it's important to just also talk about this idea of activation, because sometimes I talk to people and they're like, I'm not that stressed. But when you break down like what's happening for 95% of people in a day, there are high
Mm.
levels of activation. So, as an
Ooh.
example, you may not find, your kids saying like, I need this, I need this, I need this, getting out the door on time, getting to work. Okay, you love your job, but it's busy, but you love it, and there's lots going on, and then you're hanging out with friends and you like that, and all the while you've received like 267 emails across the day, and your WhatsApp and your Instagram and your text messages are all dinging
Mhm.
off the hook. You may not put a label on that is stressful, because stress we often associate with like mental emotional overwhelm.
Right.
But your system, your sympathetic nervous system, is activated.
Yes.
You're turned on that way. And so,
Adapting is very different. Adapting to your situation is completely different than being stress-free. I think
yeah,
that's really important. And I
yeah,
think too, this is what I see so often, and I will say specifically moms, very specifically mothers who are the ones who are the primary caregivers, who can do all of that mental labor and that emotional labor and the physical labor of the shopping and the laundry and so on and so forth. They're activated constantly. And when is their rest? And even if they do get rest, is it true rest? And is it really enough to reset, to do that stress shake like a dog
mhm,
does and actually come back down to neutral? I just can't believe that it is. And even if it is, you know, as soon as you do pickup, we're activated all over again. And then it's constant activation for the next 6, 7 hours until the kids go to bed. And then it's activation for other things because you
mhm.
still have to do the dishes and there's still finances to talk about with your partner. And at some point, hopefully, you Netflix and chill to dull
Yeah,
the pain until you go to sleep.
yeah, yeah, totally. And I think that is, that speaks to like what is health in our nervous system as well, right? And so,
Mhm.
um, so many people say like that they just want to feel calm. They want to feel calm. And calm is not actually the goal of a healthy nervous system. The,
Tell me more. What do you mean calm isn't a sign of of a healthy nervous system,
well,
Rachel?
it's a sign of a healthy nervous system, but it's not the goal of a healthy nervous system. So, you know, when we're feeling a certain way and we don't necessarily want to feel that way, like if we're feeling stressed, we're feeling activated, we're like, go, go, go. We just had the day that you just described. Like,
Mhm.
you probably at the end of the day say, like, oh, I just want to feel calm. Like, it's so go, go, go all the time. And so the
Mhm.
word calm, or that feeling of calm, that desire for calm, is there because it's the opposite of what you're feeling.
Mm.
But the sign of a healthy nervous system is not to feel calm all the time. Imagine if you felt calm all the time. That's like you're not getting excited about things. You're not feeling driven to do things. You're just like, I'm chill. Like you're just like so relaxed all the time. Like that's nice for a few days, right? But for
It's like
most
the
people,
vacation.
yeah,
Like going
exactly.
going on a vacation, you go to the spa, you're laying out, and for 5 to 7 days, that feels amazing, but by the time you're hitting day 6 and 7, you're almost starting to get a little bored.
Yeah. Yeah. You're itching
Maybe
to
that's not
do
true for
something.
yeah,
That's
maybe that's not true for
definitely,
other people listening, but I know it's
yeah.
true for me.
It's very true for me. My husband makes fun of me that I struggle with even like long weekends because I just like itch to do things. And so if you think about that, like calm is not really your desired forever state. We just reach towards it because it's the opposite of how we're feeling right now. What the goal of a healthy nervous system is that we're able to move between states. So we're able to feel activated on even a bit of stress. Like stress is not bad. We just need to find it everything in sort of moderation, right? But that we're able to feel that, but then we're able to shake it off and come back to a place of neutral. We're able to relax without feeling like I got to be doing something else, like that you can be
Yeah.
present. The other thing that is a goal of a healthy nervous system is to be able to experience emotion and let that emotion ride its full trajectory. So many of
Love
us,
this. This
women
is
in
this is a
particular,
core this is a core teaching of my work. You go and then I'll go.
yeah. So like I think women in particular, but everyone to some extent, we have been told that anger is a bad emotion. So this is just one example, right? Anger is a bad emotion. So if you are in a situation that you start to feel angry, what we have been told to do is to stuff it down, right? And that if we don't stuff it down, what could happen is we could like explode. We could start
Right.
yelling at somebody and have this real like, you know, inappropriate angry outburst. And as we are learning
Which
more and more,
historically men have been doing the whole time anyways, and it's appropriate for them.
it can be, yeah, it can be, or it's just yeah more accepted. Um,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
but anger is an appropriate emotion, and there are
Yes.
appropriate ways, and there is a difference between anger and aggression. There is an
Yes.
appropriate way to express anger in a way that allows that to leave your body without harming somebody else, right?
Yes. This is really such a core teaching in my work with kids and families. I it's so funny. I love when one of my go-tos when talking about anger is teaching kids that they can throw a pillow. And that's a totally appropriate response to being angry. That they get to take that pillow and they can throw it on the ground, they can stomp on it, they can hit the pillow, they can scream into the pillow, they can throw the pillow onto the couch, and they can do it multiple times. And then all the while they're saying, "I'm angry," and I love watching a parent go, we get to do that? And I'm like, heck yes, you get to do that. Absolutely. Please model this. And then when the parent's doing it, it starts out, they're almost nervous to do it. And they're like, this is silly. I feel silly. And then they do it. And then inevitably, every single time, they get into it because it feels good for them too. And then they're modeling this really, really appropriate, non harmful way to experience anger, because you have to experience it. Like, there's so much science on this. You would know certainly better than I that when we ride that emotional wave, we come through it in a state of much better health than when we try to avoid or ignore or stuff.
Mm-hmm. And there's lots of research around the impacts of suppressed anger on chronic health disease later. Like there's a lot that's out there around that. And I think that's so important. I love that that's something that you're teaching as part of your work, because we do need to learn ways that we can express our emotions that are safe for other people. And sometimes that means
Yes.
like going into a different room, right? Like so sometimes that means that like yes, it's not appropriate to have like an outburst in a team meeting at work,
Right.
And it doesn't mean that that emotion is going to go away. It means that when that meeting is over, you go outside, you go into a bathroom, you do something to allow that to ride through. And if you can't get to that until the end of the day and you go and you think about that, it'll be there, right? Like it's always there until we deal with it. And that's the beauty and the curse at the same time, is that our nervous system knows, but at the same point, it's the beauty that we can rewire our nervous systems. So we may have, as children, like a lot of our learned behaviors come as we're growing up, as our nervous systems are developing.
Yes, they do.
Yes, as you know, right? And
Yes, I co-sign this statement.
yeah, and it's like, as we learn responses, and we learn responses for survival. And survival, I think, can sound like a very threatening word. Like you may be in a household where like your life is not being threatened, like this is not
Mhm.
life or death, but survival as a child is the feeling of acceptance. It's the feeling of
Yes,
like that I'm safe here. It's the feeling of
yes,
being loved, of being
yes,
supported. And so it's
yes.
not like, a lot of times when we use that word survival, it can be, you know, emotionally triggering for people, because they're like, I was
Sure.
not in a household growing up where my life was being threatened. And
Right.
so I think it's just important to like define that. Um,
I I'd like to touch on that a little bit more actually and say, this is where intersectionality becomes even more important. Because the experience of being accepted as a queer child, whether or not they've identified that they're queer yet, for some kids, they know immediately. For other kids, it, it maybe not until adulthood do they really figure out their most authentic self. I know that was true for me, but I knew as a young child that who I wasn't quite right. I felt that in my bones. And also being neurodivergent. Kids, safety for a child, that love what you said, that acceptance is survival for a child. Feeling accepted, feeling loved for who they are is going to look different on each child. There's a lot of parents of adult children out there saying, I did my best. I gave you food. I gave you shelter. I gave you, love. Like I told you I loved you and I gave you hugs sometimes. That's that's not enough. That's not what we need as humans. We are finally beginning to acknowledge the truth under those layers, which is that we need a lot more. We need a whole lot more. And I don't have all the answers as to why. I don't know why we developed the way that we did. Evolution is incredible and totally beyond my full ability to understand. It's endlessly amazing, but here we are, and we do have all of the evidence as to the harm that it causes when we don't appropriately support kids, because we're all a bunch of adults with hurt children inside of us. We all have
yeah.
these hurts that we've carried, and things that we learned, whether they were true or not, they were true for us when we were 3, 4, 5, 10 years old. And we're still living with those nervous system problems decades later.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that you're bringing these pieces up, and I think it speaks to the importance of this work, because if we asked like your parents, my parents, like I think that probably at that point, like there was genuine belief. It was the accepted norm that like,
Right.
I give you shelter, I give you food, I give you hugs, I get you to school, like we're doing the things. And it's that idea, and this is where, the idea of compassion comes in, of like, so many people, I feel like we have to trust that the majority of people are doing the best they can with what they know and what they're given.
Yes.
And
I love this statement. I love this statement, and I get really excited when I hear other people using it, because it's really important. And just to tack on to what I was saying before, about the food and the shelter and the love not even being enough, that's not to say that those parents were failing.
Mhm.
Historically, over the generations, we have done better and better and better over time. And we're going somewhere really exciting right now. There's a really incredible shifts that have been happening over the last couple hundred years. So I don't want to shame anybody here. I'm not trying to make anybody feel terrible about their past. But it does matter that we acknowledge it in
For sure.
truth
Yeah.
and say what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that, that quote from Maya Angelou that like, when you know better, you do better. Right. And so as a society, we are knowing more and then we're doing better. And that's why we're
Yes.
seeing these shifts that are happening. And, we're able then, and this is what's really cool about our nervous system. And many people have probably heard the term neuroplasticity, which is the idea that our we think about it a lot from our brains, but our brains, of course, are part of our nervous system. We can repattern our nervous system. And that's what's really cool is that if you developed these responses for survival, these were wired into your nervous system as a child. And maybe that is like, we see this something so common I see, and you've brought it up already around fawning, is that like people pleasing tendency, right? So like
Mhm.
there's a lot of kids that, maybe they grew up in a household where there was a little more uncertainty in terms of adult emotions. And so
Sure.
they really played a role of being like the smoother, the people pleaser, like, okay, I'll do that. It's okay. Like, and we bring that into adulthood because that gets programmed into our nervous system. But as we move into adulthood, we learn maybe why those responses were coming up. And particularly for the parents out there, we learn that that is not a pattern that we want to pass on or demonstrate to our kids anymore. And
Yeah.
so what's really cool is that you can start to reprogram your nervous system. And it sounds easy, like that sounds like, oh, I just push a button and everything changes. But it
If
doesn't.
only, Rachel, if
If only.
only. But then
It's
you
true.
wouldn't have a job. You'd have to do something else.
It's true. And sometimes I say like I would love to not have a job. Like I
Right.
mean not I don't mean
Same.
not have a job, but like I would love to not have to talk about this work because it's just
Yeah.
universal. Um and that's just not the case. But I think about that reprogramming. It's kind of like, I'm a very visual person, so like I like giving, visual analogies of like think of like a big field that hasn't been plowed, right? And maybe there's one path that's been carved out over here. And so that's the easy path to walk, right? That's the pattern. That is the wiring from your childhood. That is
Mhm.
the easy response to situations that you're in. But when you
Mhm.
decide that there's a pattern you want to change, like maybe that's the people pleasing pattern and you want to start to set some boundaries. And that first time that you are like, actually, that's a no for me, that feels like gut wrenching, uncomfortable, right? And so you can think of that every time you do that as like walking through a field that hasn't been plowed. And at
Yeah.
first, it's like you got to lift your legs up over all this stuff and it's uncomfortable and you don't know where to step. But as you go back and forth, many, many, many times, a path starts to appear. And it starts to appear to the point where when there's a choice, you can easily go down that path.
Yeah.
And so that
I
is like
use
that action of rewiring your nervous system.
with my clients, I like to use the analogy or the visual of walking through a forest for the first time, and you have to hack through all of the overgrowth,
Mhm.
and then you start with a dirt path, and then you go over it a couple hundred more times, and then you lay some gravel, and then it gets paved, and then suddenly you have a two-way street, and then you've got a freeway, and you're zooming.
Yeah, totally.
I
Totally.
also use a lot of highway analogies in my
Yeah,
work.
I love it. I love it. It's just easy
So
for people to understand. Yeah.
yeah,
I love
absolutely, it's totally universal, totally
Yeah.
universal. So we are so far past even a half an hour together, and I'm just realizing we are barely scratching the surface here. Rachel, what do you think of a part two together?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it, because I really just think that there's so much more that we can talk about as it relates to parenting. And I'm pretty sure that parents want to know not only about what's happening in their own nervous systems and what they can do to build those new pathways, plow those fields, and pave those highways. But I think a lot of them are really interested to know how their behavior affects their children's nervous systems and
Mhm.
what they can do when they've accidentally caused their child to feel fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I don't think any parent wants to make their child feel that. So I would love for us to talk about that next. What do you say?
Yeah, I think that's great. I think it's so important. And I have good news in that field is that kids are really resilient when we can have conversations about it. So,
I
yay.
love it. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for today, for our part one, Rachel, if there was one thing that you wish someone would walk away today knowing, what would it be?
Mm, such a great question. Um, well, I think maybe, okay, my answer is twofold. I'm
It's hard
not
to pick
good.
just one
Yeah.
thing when we're
Yeah.
talking about something so important, right?
I think, okay, so one is that as human beings, we're resilient and that the situation that you find yourself in is temporary and there's always opportunity to change that. It's not easy. It's not always easy by any means, but we can change our current situation. We can make choices around that. And I think that speaks to part two of my answer, which is we didn't even really touch on this, but I love giving people something that they can like put into practice right away. And so I would encourage people with that resilience to recognize the power of a pause. And so particularly, when you're in more activated situations, when you said like if your kids have come into a fight or flight state and then it's like you feel bad about that, um, there's nothing wrong with a pause. You can do that by yourself. You can do that. It's amazing when people bring their partner, their kids into it and say, like, you know what? We just need to pause here. We're going to take a few deep breaths and we're going to come back to it. You don't have to answer a question right away. You can change your mind, but just give yourself that moment of pause. And I think when you can be intentional about it, it's really remarkable what can actually happen.
I love that with my whole heart. Rachel, if people want to find you, where can they find you? How can they work with you?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website. It's just rachelmark.ca. My Instagram, I have lots of stuff on there, is also rachelmark.ca is my handle. I have a lot of free resources, sleep support. I have a quiz that is all about looking at how stress is impacting hormones, which is a big conversation, and that's free. I do have my 10-day reset, which is all about small daily actions that can support health within our nervous system. So I always say it's nothing crazy. It's no like juice cleanse, exercise challenge. It's like come back to the foundations, the basics. And it's something that can be really beautiful to be done as a family. So there's lots of stuff on there, but starting at my website is a really good spot.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I had such a good time chatting. Clearly, I don't have words anymore. Chatting with you today.
Does your nervous system need a reset?
Oh yeah. You know, I think it's just, yeah, the pause. The pause is so helpful.
The pause.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to leave our listeners with today, is a pause.
A pause.